Wanted to think about something here today. We've been going through 1 Peter. This is our last week to do something on 1 Peter. I wanted to think about the changes that came over Peter. We've talked about that some in some of the other sermons. If you read your Bible at the beginning of the Bible, beginning of the New Testament there, we meet Peter pretty fast, and we're struck by several characteristics of him. He can be loud. He can speak too fast. Julia and I did a test once. We went to it was like a church planting assessment, whether we'd be good at church planting or not, and they gave us this test and a bunch of different things. And one of the questions was, are you more self-expressive or self-reflective? And the issue was, how long does it take a thought to go from here to here? And for me, it takes a really long time. For Julia, it's almost instantaneous. It just pops right out there. And so when you think about it, how many of you are more self-expressive? It pops out real fast. If you got a thought in your head, it comes out. That was Peter. Peter was like that. And he had a thought in his head, and boom, it's out there. And sometimes it was a good thought, it was a good idea, but a lot of times it was a bad thought and a bad idea. And he would toss it out there real quick, and Jesus would correct him and tell him we're not going to do it that way, and we're not going to think that way, and we're not going to be that way, and he would straighten him out. And Peter was bold, you know. He quickly kind of took leadership there with the other disciples, but sometimes would try to boss Jesus around, tell Jesus what they were going to do and how they were going to do it and what they were going to be about. Peter certainly is a coward there when he's confronted in the courtyard of the high priest, and he denies Jesus 3 times. But that's a weird moment, right? Because Jesus has been arrested, and he's trying to stay close, and he's not really focused like he should be. In the garden, when they first grabbed Jesus, Peter's willing to take a sword and attack all of them. All these guys come with clubs and weapons, and he's going to fight them all, which either means he's just foolhardy, you know, not one of those guys who, here, hold my beer and watch this, one of those kind of guys, or he really was a big dude. I mean, used to getting his way, used to leaning on people, maybe both, maybe in both those things. And then he changes. And it's not fast. It's not fast. If you read through the New Testament, there's stories where Peter is still doing stupid things, even later on. He gets in an argument with Paul. It's mentioned in Galatians there. They get in an argument, and he's still not quite where he needs to be. But by the end of his life, he's rifling off things like this. And I wanted to focus on this verse a little bit in 1 Peter. It says, all of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud and shows favor, shows grace to the humble. Peter's tossing stuff like this out at the end of his life. And I think it's a whole life of just being an apprentice of Jesus. Again, that John Mark Comer book I'm reading, he says the word disciple is a good word, but it's a Christian word, and sometimes it's a word we don't use in other contexts, and so maybe a word like apprentice, he says, might be a better word. And I think that's interesting, because like if you think about an apprentice, I've known a couple of guys even recently who have been apprentice for plumbers or apprentice for an electrician, and the idea is they know that if they'll do it for 2 or 3 or 4 years, that at the end of that time, then they'll be an electrician or they'll be a plumber. You know, by doing the work and studying with this guy and working with this guy, eventually you can do your own crew. You can be your own, and you'll never be that guy, but you'll be able to do the things that guy does. That's what the word means. And Peter here he's become an apprentice of Jesus. Like a person goes into medical school, and they'll even do an internship maybe, and they want to study under another doctor, and they want to learn from another doctor. So they take that apprenticeship with a doctor, and the idea that at the end of a long period of time, then I can be a doctor. And I can prescribe medicine, and I can make diagnosis, or I could do surgeries at the end of the time. And you don't do all that schooling with the hope that at the end of it you'll just know some of the language, you know, be able to watch Grey's Anatomy and know what's going on. That's not the reason you do it. I mean, the whole reason why you get into it is so at the end of it you'll be a doctor, or you'll be a surgeon, or you'll be a specialist of some sort. You'll be able to do the things. And that's what Peter's done his whole life. He's been an apprentice or a disciple of Jesus. And the guy who was there at the beginning, who was so bold and proud, I mean, over and over and over again, he's not like that anymore. Now he can say things like this. He says, all of you, And the Greek of that means all of you. So like every one of you, like everyone, there's no escape of it. All of you, clothe yourselves with humility, because God opposes the proud. I just want to think about that for a minute. We'll start with the word humble there at the end. I think sometimes we think about the word humble and or humility, and we misdefine it. Sometimes we think that being humble is about pretending like you're nothing, pretending like you don't know anything, pretending like you don't have any answers. You might be a talented person, but if you're a humble person, the thinking goes, you'll tell people, oh, no, I can't do that. Well, you're a great singer. No, I can't hardly sing at all. Or you're a great, well, you really do good at that job. Oh, I can't do anything. I don't know what you're even talking about, great cook. Oh, I can't cook. It's barely fit to eat, and don't even try that. And that's what humility is. But that's not really what we're shooting for here with the word humble. Humble just means a healthy self-forgetfulness. More than a self-deprecation. It's you just don't think about yourself that much. Rick Warren's quote, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less. Right? I mean, I just don't think about myself too much. Now, that's kind of a hard word for me if I really were to meditate on it, because I think about myself all the time. I go into a room full of people and I think about what they're thinking about me. And I try to evaluate whether I make sense or not, or is this going like I want it to go, or I mean, it can be anywhere. And I'm constantly thinking about my place and my status and where I'm at, but that's not really what humility is. I mean, I think God is still working on me, showing me that real humility, you just don't. Well, a C.S. Lewis quote, I wrote it down. It's too long to put on the slide, but I thought it was really good. He said, don't imagine, this is C.S. Lewis, don't imagine if you met a really humble man, he would be what most people call humble nowadays. He wouldn't be the sort of greasy, smarmy person who's always telling you that he's nobody. Probably all you'd think about him is he seemed cheerful, intelligent, took a real interest in what you said to him. And if you dislike him, it's probably because you feel a little envious of anybody who can enjoy life so easily. He's not thinking about being humble. He's not thinking about himself at all. If anyone would like to acquire humility, Lewis says, I can tell them the first step. The first step is to realize that you're proud. And it's a big step, too. At least nothing whatever can be done before it. And if you think that you're not conceited, it means that you're very conceited indeed. So I want to do a few tests on that. And just think about whether maybe this is something that you deal with. A proud person is defensive whenever they're got onto about anything. They immediately think of 20 excuses for why they do the things they do, or why they were stuck in the position they were stuck in, why they had no choice. A proud person is vengeful. They keep track of who's wronged them, and they want to look for little ways to either keep distance from those people to hurt them, or to make sure they know. A proud person can be quiet all night in the house if the agenda for being quiet is to let everybody know how mad they are. A proud person can be distant, but at the same time envious. You're constantly frustrated that other people have a little more than you, or they're a little more attractive than you, or they're a little more powerful than you, or they seem to get through life a little easier than you. Sometimes when we're proud, we can't help but interrupt the conversation to tell our side. It's like being in a discussion with somebody and they're telling you something, but before they've even finished, you already have decided what you're going to say next. And you're just looking for a chance to break in there and get your opinion in. And thinking about this verse again that Peter tossed out, it says, God opposes the proud. Most of us do too. Most of us don't like being around people like that. We'll tell ourselves that I just don't like how they carry themselves off. It seems like they're always bragging about themselves, or they're always interrupting. You can't ever get your point across because they're telling you what their point is. It seems like they never really want to listen, or never really want to be part of what I'm talking about. And God opposes them probably for the same reason. They don't think about anybody but themselves. And I don't think anybody really thinks of themselves as especially proud. But if you start looking at some of those little, I see some of that in me. I do some of that stuff. It's a weird thing. And of course, when I'm saying be humble, I'm not saying you've got to grovel to people, and I'm not saying that you've got to enable bad behavior, and I'm not saying that you've got to, if you are good at something, it's okay to admit you're good at it. That's not a bad thing. It's just you want to make sure that you notice what everybody else is doing too. I mean, I think real humility is you're lifting the other people up. And this idea of clothing yourself here at the top, it's like accessorizing. And actually the word was like putting on an apron is the idea. You clothe yourself with humility. And when I think of it like that, you can't help but think of Jesus on the Last Supper where he dresses himself to serve. I mean, he removes his nicer clothes and he washes their feet. And he puts himself in the very lowest spot. And it offends some of the guys. It offends Peter. Peter can't understand what Jesus is doing, and he tries to talk him out of it. And he's trying to show Peter something. It's a teaching thing, but it's just how Jesus is. He's more interested in you. And he shows that all the way through the New Testament. He's just more interested in you. His whole life, he's given himself away. And at the end of that whole life, he's probably the most famous person who ever lived. The more that he gave himself away, the bigger deal that God made him. I think there is something to that. I do. I want to be like Jesus, and so it means I'm willing to dress and clothe myself like Jesus. It means I'm going to on purpose try to look like him and to be like him. And it's not so much what would Jesus do, because I can't ever be Jesus, but it's what would Jesus do if he were me? If he had my family and my job and my headaches, my health, my strengths and my weaknesses. If Jesus were me, what would he do? And try to be that, to clothe myself. It's like an intentional thing. A person might say, well, this just feels, sometimes Julie and I might be invited to some place and the dress code comes back and says, hey, dress up a little bit, business formal kind of outfit. And, I don't know if I want to wear that. I don't feel like myself in that, I'm more of a jeans guy. I feel more myself in jeans. I don't really feel like myself in that. And she never cares, Julia, when we get in those kind of things. I'm not going with you if you're in jeans and you're the only one in jeans. So you put on the clothes because you want to go to whatever thing it is. And it may not feel like you. It may not feel like you. But this is who I want to be. So I dress myself to serve. I dress myself to lift up other people and to look to their concerns. And Peter says, all of you, clothe yourselves this way. Make the decision to be this kind of person. And then he goes on. He says, you humble yourself before the Lord. You do that, and he'll lift you up. And this requires a certain amount of trust. I mean, part of the reason why the proud person has a hard time with pride, the reason they have a hard time not pushing themselves forward, the reason they have a hard time is they're afraid if they don't let everybody know how hard they have it, or if they don't let everybody know how special they are, if they don't let everybody know what a wonder they are, then they won't know. And maybe if they don't know, then they won't, make a big deal about you. The big fear is that if you don't express and advertise yourself, if you don't stick up for yourself, nobody else will. And that might be a good strategy to do for a job interview, I suppose, but I don't think it's a good strategy to do all of life. He says if you'll make a decision to just look for others first, God will lift you up. And again, the weird thing about it is the people that I most enjoy being around do that. you would think it'd be real natural. I could see that they do it, and then I'd want to do it. But it's not always. I've got to make a decision sometimes to choose it. And he says, be alert, be of sober mind. You've got an enemy, the devil, who's prowling around like a roaring lion. He's looking for someone to devour. Now, the devil, if we can think about this here, a lot of times in church we don't talk about the devil because it seems like that kind of, for some people, gets into the area of supernatural and mystical and those kind of things. But just for the sake of argument here, as we're talking about this thing, I believe there's a devil, and I think he is trying to trip us up. And I think he's been, at some level, tamed by the cross. There's certain things he can't do. I think the horror movie pictures of the devil making you spit green soup and float off the bed, I don't think that stuff's probably real most of the time. But I do think he's looking for ways to knock you down and keep you down. And with the context of Peter here, the big thing he'll do to knock you down is to get you to focus mostly on yourself. When we talk about devouring you and the devil talks about eating you up, his focus mainly is just to get you to worry about yourself all the time. Talk about yourself all the time. Think about yourself all the time. And it gets in the way of 100 different things. Somebody will ask you if you could help them out, and you can't help them because you need all that energy and that time and that money for you. Hey, can you help serve in this way or that way? I haven't got time for those sorts of things. Can you give to this little, I wish I could, but I need that money for something else. And we're constantly trying to protect and guard ourselves. And the enemy, the devil, our enemy, he's looking for guys like that he can devour. Now, in the case of these guys, Peter goes on, he says, you need to resist the devil, stand firm in your faith, because you know the family of believers throughout the world's going through suffering. The way the devil attacked them is a lot of state persecution. I don't know that we get any of that, but certainly we get suffering in the world. Certainly there's things that knock us backwards. And the devil uses that suffering again as a means of trapping us. Here's the big thing. I was talking to somebody this morning. When I'm sick, I'm not a good patient when I'm sick. And I married a poor person to help me with that, because she's, if I get the sniffles, Julia's gone, just out of the house. I guess I got to sleep in a different bed or on the couch or out in the garage, because she doesn't want to take any chance of catching whatever it is that I've got. And all I want is to whine about my bad smell. Oh, honey, and it was a terrible condition. We had a thing in the office there where one of the secretaries made fun of a man flu, and we had to tell them, ladies, you have no idea. Just be thankful. All you got to do is deliver children and stuff. Man flu's tough. It's rough. And when I'm sick like that, that's all I can think about is how I don't feel good. I want everybody to take care of me and feel bad for me and be sympathetic to me and do good things for me, because I'm just in such an awful shape. When I'm suffering because people have been mean to me, it's very tempting to want to show that on my face. And I try not to do it, but I'm bad at not doing it. I want everybody to see how much I'm suffering, how hard it is. Oh, man, feel bad for me. Boy, life is tough. And I think when the devil hits us, that's exactly the response he's hoping to get. So Peter says you've got to resist him in those moments. In those moments when you're most likely to feel sorry for yourself, in those moments when you're most likely to want to get all the attention on you again, that's the very moment you need to stand up and resist him. Put your focus back on God. And James, chapter 4, in a very similar verse to this, says, resist the devil and he will flee from you. And I think that's true. When I on purpose kind of stand up there real strong, and I still keep my focus on other people, I still keep my focus on God, I don't let whatever it is knock me down. And that's, again, sometimes it feels fake, like I'm just clothing myself with Jesus. Sometimes it doesn't feel genuine, like a choice I'm making more than something that's welling up inside of me. But when I make that choice, when I choose to resist, when I choose to stand up and choose to go a different direction, I find peace there. Now, of course, if I'm sick, I'll still be sick at the end of it. If I'm stressed, I may still be stressed at the end of it. But when I keep my focus in the place where it's supposed to be, then I regain my purpose. I know again why I'm here. I'm no longer a victim, but I'm running hard after God. Peter says, I can cast all my anxiety on him because he cares for you. I tell people on memory verses, this is a pretty good one here. It's pretty easy, not very long. He's referencing something that's in Psalm 55:22. It says very similar thing in Psalm 55 there. But you can cast your cares on Jesus because he cares for you. I mean, on the one hand, what an interesting thing that is, that we believe in a God who actually cares about you. That you're not just some face in the crowd, but he knows you. He knows what you're going through. He knows your ups, your downs, your strengths, your weaknesses, and he knows where the good life is. And if we choose to follow hard after him, he'll get us there. And I can cast on him my anxiety. Even in the more contemporary use of that word, my stresses, my panic attack, I can give all that to him. When I feel depression coming on, I can again put my focus on him. I can cast it his direction, knowing that he cares for me and he's got a purpose. But again, when I give him those things, then I can focus again on the things that I need to focus on. So I throw away things like envy and anger and pride and shame. And I remember that God loves me. There's a story in the Old Testament about a guy named Ahab and a guy named Elijah and a guy named Naboth. And Naboth was a farmer, and he owned a vineyard right beside Ahab's palace. Ahab was a king. And Ahab really liked that vineyard. He said, well, it'd be a great vineyard for me to have. And so he tells Naboth, won't you sell it to me? And Naboth says, I couldn't do it. It belonged to my father and my father's father and my father's father's father. It's been our family for generations. Couldn't even think about letting anybody else have this land. And then, people get like that about the land. This is my land. I like being able to walk on it and work on it, and it's my land, and I can't sell it. And Ahab's real put out about that. He really wants the land. And so he goes into his room and kind of pouts. He won't eat. Ahab's real proud. He's king of the whole land, but he doesn't get one thing he wants, and now he just can't even eat. He's so sad and so upset. And he's married to a really wicked woman, Jezebel, and that's the name. People know the name Jezebel if they don't know anything else about anything. And Jezebel comes into the bedroom there. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you eating? Why aren't you, hanging out with there? Well, I'm just real mad. What's going on? Well, I wanted that vineyard next door, and he won't sell it. And Jezebel says, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. And great, Ahab says. And so what Jezebel does is she gets him killed. She just gets rid of Naboth. And she gets you guys to lie about him and turns the whole community against him, and everybody's cheering for Naboth to die. And so they kill him, and she goes back to her husband, hey, good news, he died. Vineyard's yours. And Ahab says, great. And because he's a kid, he's all about himself. And so he goes in and he's looking at the vineyard, and God sends Elijah to talk to Ahab. Elijah's a prophet. And he sends Elijah to go talk to Ahab. And as soon as Elijah walks up, Ahab says, oh, I guess you found me, my enemy. They don't get along. And Elijah says, it's you who've made an enemy of yourself to God. It's you that's become an enemy, and God saw what you did. I mean, you had an innocent man killed so you could grab his land, and you have all the land, and you killed an innocent man to grab his land. And so he says, I'm going to tell you, God's had it with you, and you're going to die, and you're going to die bloody and violent. And your wife's who had this all arranged behind the scenes, she's going to die bloody and violent. And your kids are going to die. And it just goes on. It's an awful, it would be the kind of thing that'd shake you up pretty bad if you heard it from anybody, but especially hear it from a guy like Elijah, who's a prophet, who usually the stuff he says comes true, and wow, what an awful thing. And it says that, it mentions right at that moment that Ahab was the worst king Israel ever had. You know, there's a thing that sometimes we do in American politics. If somebody's really bad, we'll say, they're just like Hitler, right? Hitler's always the go-to. They're just like Hitler. They're a Hitler guy, one of those Hitler guys. And we'll toss that out because it's like the worst insult you can give. Well, Ahab was like that for ancient Israel. To be just like Ahab he's the worst. And Jezebel, it mentions her too. There was a king like Ahab, prodded on by Jezebel. They were just the worst of the worst of the worst. But it says when Ahab hears this thing from Elijah, it says he tears his clothes and he puts on sackcloth and he starts praying real hard. God, I'm sorry. He begs God for mercy. And before Elijah leaves the vineyard, he's on his way home, God speaks to him and said, did you see how Ahab humbled himself there? So I'm going to give him some more time. And he's the worst. And there's a lesson about God there. You know, a lot of people think that they've done something or some things, or maybe one big thing or lots of little things, that's so bad that you'll never get back in God's good graces. That God must be so disappointed in all this awful stuff you did, and you've been written off. And Ahab was the worst of the worst. People still use the name Jezebel to refer to a bad person. I mean, it's the worst of the worst. You see how he humbled himself, God says. I'm going to take him back. I'm going to give him another chance. It's a powerful thing. You can't totally get away from God. You can't totally disappear on God. He won't quit on you. And so my encouragement to any one of you is to come back to him. When we talk about being humble, I'm going to encourage you to ask God to run things in your life. Ask God to make changes if he needs to. Ask God to fix some stuff. If there's one or two things you've done that really shame and guilt you, ask God to forgive you for those things. Because if he'd forgive a guy like Ahab, I think he'd forgive anybody. Ask God to take away your pride. And you know, a lot of times we think of the word pride and we think of somebody, you know, who's rich and powerful and arrogant. I don't know, maybe a famous celebrity or an actor or an incoming president, and we think about somebody like that. And I don't think it's usually that way. It can be that. But a lot of times, don't you have somebody in your family that all the other people in the family say, they won't listen to you. You can't tell them anything. Don't any of you have a coworker like that? That one guy or one lady in the office, man, don't waste your time. She won't listen. She knows everything. You don't have to be rich and powerful to be arrogant. You just got to be self-absorbed. And anybody can turn around at any time and call out to God. I want to think again about that list in communion. It's Jesus. That's the answer. You can't do it yourself. You need Jesus. Let's pray. Dear Lord God, I thank you for this group. And I ask you, God, if there's anybody here who needs to draw close to you, that you push them. Father, there's 1,000 different reasons why I want to keep my stuff secret and keep it to myself and not open up, and most of them are bad. I just pray, God, that if anybody here needs to draw close to you, that you give them the courage to do it. In Christ's name, amen.